All right, we'll call the Board of Finance meeting to order on 6 p.m. at April 15th meeting. I would like to start off with a Pledge of Allegiance. If we could stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, tonight we're going to have public audience. All those who wish to speak, I guess you have to give your name, address, and use the mic. Do we need, will they be able to hear from there?
They can hear.
They can hear? Burke, all right?
Hello? Can you
From
hear
the
me?
audience?
Just stand and speak, you'll be okay.
Stand and speak? Okay. Would anyone like to call public audience open? Would anyone like to speak? Mrs. Coe? Yeah. You could stand, just state your name and address, please.
This isn't
Don't call 26 Whitcomb Drive.
not the same as what you delivered last week, right? This is something
No, this is
new.
brand new. I'm creating.
Hot off the press,
I don't have time to think.
completely fabricated from whole cloth. Go ahead.
I don't want you to be bored. We are now at the final hour in the process of the public's assessment of the budget. This budget has suggested that, this board has suggested the budget should come in at 0% to 1%. Neither budget heeded your suggestions, and now you're going to ask the taxpayers to vote on these budgets that are not consistent with your recommendation. This year, there is a $900,000 taken from the general fund in order to soften the increases offline. Money was added to the capital non-recurring fund to increase spending offline. There are shortfalls in the golf budget year after year, and this board accommodates golf lobbyists, knowing full well that the golf course will never make money or break even. Most of the golf rounds are played by out-of-town players. Year after year, this board approves large maintenance expenditures at the golf course, knowing that revenues are diminished year after year. It is time that this board decides whether the taxpayers should support a failing golf course or the golf course should be contracted to golf professionals. When golf was profitable, there was no discussion on future plans. Now that competition is fierce and there are too many golf courses competing for fewer and fewer golfers, it is time for action. This board has approved large expenditures at the golf course with no returns on the investment. People will not purchase homes in Simsbury when they realize that they would have to pay for the upkeep of the golf course year after year. Where is the master plan for the golf course with realistic revenues and expenditures? Why this board is discussing at this late date whether the roads are maintenance or capital expenditure shows poor planning. Where is the policy on the definition of maintenance and its allocation in the budget with long-term bonding for roads and other maintenance projects that need upkeep year after year? Bonding for projects add additional costs to the projects. Maintenance should be part of the operating budget. Where is the plan? At the last budget hearing, a teacher from Ethel Walker's school spoke in favor of the budgets. It is easy for her to approve the budget since Ethel Walker is exempt from paying taxes on all their properties and the homes for the teachers. Since we are asked to approve millions of dollars for their land, the least they could do is give us money in lieu of taxes, as does Westminster School. Simsbury cannot be competitive unless the mill rate is lowered to compete with the surrounding towns. The estimated property tax for a $300,000 home in West Hartford is $10,890. Granby, $10,449. Glastonbury, $10,530. Canton, $8,073. Avon, $7,896. And Farmington, $7,221. Simsbury tops the list with $11,553. Until we become competitive with the surrounding towns, there will not be any economic development, and fewer people will be buying homes in Simsbury, and companies will not elect to come to Simsbury. Perhaps the reason for dwindling enrollment is the cost of owning a home in Simsbury. The school systems in the surrounding towns provide equal education opportunities, so why pay more? Why pay for expensive books with mandated curriculum when the students can use a little tiny flash drive to download all materials needed for their studies? If Edward Snowden can use a flash drive to download all the NASA surveillance activities, why can't the students download their curriculum for the year? This would greatly reduce costs. There are many facilities in town that provide needed medical services to the community. Why can't the school system use these professionals on an hourly basis as needed to reduce costs? With projections of continual reduction in students, at what level will the Board of Education close a school? This will reduce operating costs. When the board appropriates funding for 10 years, are they looking at the indicators in the community that lead to reduced revenue? Our largest taxpayer, the Hartford, will be leaving during the 10-year period. It appears that Ensign Bickford, with a reduced presence, will be leaving, and it is questionable whether Dino Nobel will remain in the future. Is it time to review the amount of debt that the town can absorb without increasing taxes? This board has the ability to reduce or cut the expenditures that are below the 1% that appear to be maintenance expenditures that will be appropriated by majority vote. Do your job. The budgets as presented for referendum vote are taking from Peter to pay Paul. We cannot continue to use the general fund as a piggy bank to lower operating expenses. It is time for the Board of Finance to plan for the future. The board can no longer rob Peter to pay Paul, and the Board of Finance can no longer move projects around to reduce operating budgets. The general fund was not meant to be a slush fund. I cannot support the budgets as presented. Thank you for listening, and of course my comments will be on Simsbury Patch and www.simsbury.com. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
I'd just like to say for the record, Mr. Chairman, that I've never been lobbied by anyone on the golf course. I'm not aware of who the golf course lobbyists are, but I just wanted for the record to be clear
Okay.
that I've never been lobbied.
Would anyone else like to speak?
Dave Blumey, 11 Musket Trail. It's not a specific question to this year's budget, but hopefully a simple one that's somewhat related. Is there a 5-year plan for bringing Simsbury's mill rate in some degree of parity with the other communities in the Farmington Valley? Is there in existence some sort of documented plan that as you're looking forward to achieve that kind of parity? Thank you.
Currently, there is no written plan. There's always been a unwritten guideline. We have a 5-year capital plan, and the board has always looked at how we compare to other towns. In the last few years, and I believe even this year, we're below our surrounding towns on increases. No, our mill rate is not lower than theirs or the same as theirs, but that's always been the case. And it's my understanding that we're getting better. If you look at the fact, you can probably do a chart and show we've gotten better. Revaluation causes a distortion there because home values move differently in each town, which then changes the mill rate. The thing we can control is the increases of the budget, and I believe if you look at the last 5 years, we've been below Avon each year, our increase. And one thing our board set up as a goal is we have a long-range goal to get a long-range, a more formal plan, like you suggest, and we're gonna be tackling that this year because the issues of the Hartford, declining enrollment, there's some major issues that probably require a real serious look at modeling out. So thank you for your comments.
You're welcome, because I strongly encourage a written 5-year plan. I think without that kind of forward thinking, unfortunately, it is reaction as opposed to planning. And nothing ever comes exactly as planned, but without a formal plan, it's very difficult to achieve that.
Would anyone else like to?
Yeah, my name's Mike Rinaldi, Pinnacle Mountain Road. I moved here 40 years ago, and we did have the highest mill rate at that time. Okay, so this is new, and it has occurred within the past 25 years. I believe you may have been on the board, and I maybe stand corrected, and because I'm trying to figure out what year it was, when our per pupil costs were 128 out of 169 towns. That's been a dramatic change since then. That shows where we were and where we are now. And that's a big problem that we have to face, because the superintendent of schools at his last board meeting made a comment that was kind of disturbing. He said, you know, our 1.05 budget, don't expect it next year. Expect 3.5, 3 to 3.5. Well, he was correct, because his real budget was 3.25. The only reason it got down to 1.48, because for the first time in a long time, he downsized. Now, I feel sorry for him to some extent, because the problem that's been created in the past 10 years was not his fault. It was a real shrewd prior superintendent of schools who really led us down the wrong track. And by the way, the previous chairman of the Board of Finance was a facilitator. And I know that you personally gave me a lot of the ideas to look into these problems, because you were one of the voices that always said, how do we account for the decreasing enrollment? How do we account for the decreasing? That was your comment all the time during those years. Yet the previous the previous board chairman of finance was a facilitator. He always gave a guideline to the Board of Education that was between 30 and 80% higher than the CPI, along with a 2% to 3%, last year a 3.75% decrease in enrollment. Now, say, well, you got a whole bunch of numbers, prove them. They're basically the Board of Education's numbers. They're their budgets. They come from their commentary. I'm not making this stuff up. But in the past 10 years, if you look at your bill that you get from the town of Simsbury on your tax rate, you start wondering, you say, well, why? Why is this? The educational system is no better. Some people might think it's a little worse, but it's certainly no better. So it's time for, you guys have the numbers, you're the finance people, you have to do something, and the problem is right here. Here's the problem. Until you fix it, we're in trouble. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
That's
Pope?
funny.
Any other,
Try to be sympathetic.
I just wanted to, on David's comment, and point well taken relative to the tax burdens in Simsbury, and it is something I think that we're keenly aware of from both an economic development perspective and also from the perspective of our taxpayers. I do think, as Peter pointed out, there are a number of variables that you need to look at, obviously one being the timing of revaluation, but the other being the relative tax burdens. If you look at the average price of a home, for example, in Avon, and the average size of a home in Avon, there's a dramatic, fairly dramatic difference as between our community and theirs. So the average homeowner may, in fact, well be paying a much higher rate because the numbers that I don't know if you, Joan, you used, was it $200 and whatever $1,000, but the average home price in Avon is significantly higher. That does make a difference, certainly, when people there are many more McMansions populating the landscape.
okay, anyone else on public audience?
Sure. Dave Chase, 39 Woodhaven Drive. And just thinking about Ethel Walker Woods, I hope that you're going to approve the final payment for Ethel Walker Woods. I don't know where you folks stand on that right now, but I think it needs to be done. The thing I'm concerned about, I think, is that the ballot, when the ballot gets printed, it's always for the full amount, and there's no indication for the people who are voting that a good portion of those funds are being matched by a grant, so that the cost to the town is a lot less. So then, they're going to vote for over $1 million, and really, it's going to be several $100,000 instead of $1 million over. I don't know whether anybody has any ability to change the way the ballots are printed, but it's an annoying problem, and I hope this year the Finance Committee approves that final part for the Ethel Walker Woods. The whole thing is completed.
Thank you.
You
On
want to speak to that?
on the ballot,
Well, I can talk to Judith tomorrow. That makes sense, though. I tend to agree with you. I said I agree with you. I'll look into it tomorrow with
Oh.
Judith Blank from
Okay.
Day Pit.
I believe we have to do the gross amount.
You do, but you can spell
But you can
out,
say it.
you can say, does the town approve X with the understanding that Y is coming in the form of grants or something to that effect,
But-
I believe.
But let me ask you this,
We can't guarantee the grant.
Right, that's the problem.
Oh,
I think you have to, I think we have in the bond language, and unfortunately the voters don't see that, is we have to approve the total amount. It could be reduced.
Sure.
Maybe we could spell out more by grants, but we can't guarantee the grant, because I don't believe it's, you know, the
no matter
money's
what, the
coming.
full amount has to appear
Right,
on there.
I
but you
believe
can
we have
put
to
an
give the
explanation.
authorization for the
You
full
mean
amount.
the grant is not guaranteed yet, or?
Most grants aren't guaranteed until they're actually received.
Oh,
Just
you mean
my
until the town
route.
approves the total amount?
No.
No, until it goes through its legislative hurdles.
Oh, okay.
Never believe them when they say the check is in the mail.
Yeah.
When we get it in the bank, then we know we have it. But I mean, it's anticipated. We have not received a grant on this that we've anticipated. My understanding, we've received everything. And that's why I believe way back when it was broken out into pieces, so we could get more state assistance.
Oh,
That was
yeah, sure.
the method to the madness. I kind of wish we'd broken it out into about 7 years instead of 3, because then we could have gotten more grants, but unfortunately, we only chose 3 at the time. And so, you know, because you only can apply for each piece of land for this one grant. But this is the final phase, and we're done with it. So, thank you, Joe. And anyone else have any comments or public audience? If none, thank you. We'll move on to approve the minutes. Can I have a motion on the minutes of March 25th?
So moved.
Second? Any comments on changes to the minutes? On
Confess I didn't.
Page 1, 3, that paragraph, we're talking about Mrs. Glassman spoke. The last line. I guess I didn't, maybe I wasn't reading it right at lunch, but I'm not sure what we're trying to say, what she was trying to say. It says, Ms. Glassman noted that the town's grand list has grown by 0.59% from M1 to M1 and 0.9 for planning purposes.
Do you want me to explain that?
Yeah.
M1 to, it's M13 to M13. It's a January 30th submission to the state of Connecticut by the assessor's office.
Yeah.
So from January of 2013 to January of 2014, the grand list increase was .59 or .60 is the way I rounded it.
So maybe if we put the two dates in there,
Good idea.
That's fine.
so then it can make it clear.
Okay.
Is EMI?
You know what we just said?
mid-cycle or Middle fiscal year, maybe? Is that what the EMI stands
No,
for?
that's
Look at
just the official submission of your October 1st grand
Okay.
list.
We dealing with that?
No, I don't have that. I don't have that copy because this was before those changes. So
Okay.
just go ahead and then you give me a copy. Go ahead.
So-
just keep going.
All right, so what are we going to say now instead of, so we say from October?
From the January 2013 M13 grand list.
January 1, yeah,
It's actually January 30th, but that's
Yeah.
okay. 2013 M13 to the January 30th, 2014 M13 grand list. The grand list growth was .59.
wait, a minute, from the January, that doesn't, you said,
January, it should be 30th is the submission?
They're
date?
both January 30th, yes.
January
It's no
30th,
later than January
2013,
30th.
M13
So
to
14?
January 30th, 2014, M13.
Correct. Correct.
okay,
Sorry, there's a lot of 13s in January.
so it's 13 and it's 14, okay. And 0.9% for planning purposes, so now that,
And so, no, that was the grand list growth. For planning purposes, because you guys updated your grand list in May, your grand list went up .9. So,
so we have this, the
For
grand
what
list
time
growth.
period?
No, it's my understanding that the
Plan year to
.59 was
plan
the
year.
October 1 grand list.
correct,
And that the .9 increase is the most current one.
correct.
And it could even be changed by the time we get to actually set the mill rate. Could even go up. Because that's constantly moving.
Correct.
That comment I made about numbers moving, that's where that came from, because that grand list moves and...
Correct. Grand list continues to change, correct.
Right. Okay. Do we think we know what we want that to say? Do you understand what we're trying to say? You don't have the original language?
I think it was, not, I don't have, someone did give me a copy for the meeting, so I
That-
don't have the change
All right.
of adding that in, but I can get it, so it's on.
That
it's on
that
the-
is kind of how she said it, but
Okay, yeah, that's what I figured. All right, then I have on page 4, Says, Mr. Askham noted there will be public meeting, he also stated that anything over $900,000, I believe I said on the capital budget, has to go to referendum. So instead of budget, it's capital
Yeah.
budget. I think because that's, the capital items are the 1% rule.
1% is what you said.
Yeah, 1%, over 900,000 or 1% on the capital budget. So that's, the technical term is 1%, 900,000 is about the approximate number.
So do you want 900,000 to come off?
I'd say
Now-
1%, or I think you said.
Anything over
approximately.
900,000 or 1%
Of the capital
of,
budget?
no, 1% of the budget on the capital budget has to go to referendum. 1% on the operating budget of the capital budget, though. So if the operating budget's $90 million, 1%'s 900,000. So if there's a capital item over 1%, it has to go on the referendum.
So anything over 1%.
Now, there'd been some interpretation in the past, that used to be 2%, that's why that's noted, because now we're putting items 1% over, that's the current interpretation, correct? Because we used to always do 2% before we changed the charter, and there's been some little confusion in that, yeah, a couple of years ago, so we,
So Peter, how's this sound? So that, he said, also said that anything over 1% of the operating
Yeah.
budget in requested capital expenditures
Yeah.
has to go to referendum,
there we go.
in parentheses, approximately $900,000.
Right, approximately, yeah, that sounds good. That's why we have lawyers. To say what,
One of the
to
reasons.
say what we,
One of the reasons,
what we
huh?
need. I'm just an accountant, I deal in numbers.
Well, I was thinking actually about Joan's comment and the fair use laws, and if, and what the authors might have to say if everybody downloaded their textbooks
Yeah.
onto a disk, and whether legally, how quickly we'd be sued, not whether we'd be sued, but how quickly.
Does anyone else have any changes to the minutes?
Intellectual property
It's okay.
laws.
I'll handle it.
All those in favor with the changes?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Moving and seconding.
That was Jeff and Linda. For them. Okay, now we're going to move on to the discussion and possible action on the proposed 14-15 capital improvement plan. I assume that's the capital items? Okay.
This first sheet is all the different.
Yeah, that's more operating,
These are all operating.
operating budget, so I assume we're getting to the
They haven't been.
capital projects. We have draft motions for capital projects.
We do.
Well, first of all, let's start off with, just to talk about capital in overall. Then we'll get down to specifics.
Okay.
You know, and what I say by overall is, if we approve these projects brought forward, there's a net number after grants and expected reimbursements from the state, or some of them are getting paid out of the sewer operating fund, so therefore they're not even going to bond. There's going to be a certain number we could theoretically bond. Now, we had discussed, and I know we've done this in the past, not necessarily bonding everything, but sometimes paying out of reserves for some amounts. I know last year we did about 400,000, I think we did, of projects, I think about 400,000 that way. So that's something to think about. On some of these, we could pay, as I call it, pay cash or pay out of reserves for it, so we don't actually go to bond and incur bond costs. I know we had asked Joe to prepare a schedule to, if we did some of these, what do the projects have in there for bond costs, and what could we save by paying for them directly out of reserves instead of going to bond for them? And were we truly going to save any money? Because people put money in for bonding, and does it just shift that cost somewhere else, or is it truly a savings? So perhaps you could speak a little on that, if that makes a difference. Oh, we do have a presentation.
All right, so sat with Jeff today to try and grab what the bonding
We're
costs were.
sitting in the wrong place.
I mean, we're all sitting in the wrong
You wanna
spot.
sit right here, or you're more than welcome to take a look here. So I tried to pull together all the bonding costs for each property, and it's not
I like this room better than the other one. You got better boards.
Yeah, you're in a good place.
Yeah, the seats are actually nicer.
Yeah.
So we tried to break it out on a project-by-project basis. This is kind of as presented. There's a couple that we had to make assumptions for, specifically technology infrastructure, alternate energy efficiency projects. Those were the two estimates. Everything else was spiked out in the presentation. But they range from about 1% to roughly 2% of the cost of the overall projects. I think the reason that you guys wanted to do this because you guys were talking about items that you weren't going to bond for, what the potential savings were. So take, for example, this golf course improvements at $125,000. If you guys were to choose not to bond for this, you're hypothetically going to approve about $122,500, saving the $2,500 with the bonding costs, because you're not bonding that.
So we could actually lower the project
Yep.
approval, and that would be okay, wouldn't hinder the project, and we'd get saved.
And I also built this, unfortunately, this is kind of more comfortable for me than probably anyone else. I did build a model that'll show what fits in your debt service schedule, but we can go over that after we talk about what projects you guys do want to approve or not approve. But right now, I can make every single thing that is out there for 2015 and 2014. We could bond that $9.9 million, and I could make it fit into the 7% model. It would require 1 year of principal-free payments. By state statute, I'm allowed to do 2 years, so I'd have to figure out some instruments. It's pretty conservative estimates, 10 years, 1.75 interest rate, which is actually a little bit higher than they were bonding for last week for AAA-rated Connecticut municipalities.
When do we get the big savings, the drop-off? When's that high school bond?
In 18.
18?
So you can kind of see that right here, where it goes from 3.6 to 1.6.
Right.
This is your existing debt service schedule. This principal, interest, and your total. And over here, I built in what the changes in debt service are associated with that 9.9 million. And that just basically added the two together, and this is the 1 year principal free.
Now, this schedule builds into it not only when you bond it, but the cash flow in the terms of the timing.
Yeah, I assumed a January of 2015. And honestly, anytime after January of 2015, it fits in from a cash flow perspective. And in all honesty, guys, this is conservative, ultra conservative. You guys are not going to be bonding 9.9 million. I know that you're going to pay for some of it. Some of it you're going to be able to break out, like the roads, for example. If you want to break that up into separate components, we can do that.
Well, some of the school, though, isn't going to get approval, so they don't need the couple of the school projects for a year. We don't need to bond those for,
Other than the architectural type costs.
So
the bulk
Pete-
of the costs happen
yeah.
in the
So if we
summer.
wanted to do a January of 15 bond and a January of 16 bond, that wouldn't hurt your project. I mean, as long as we have the approval, because you're not going to conceivably be ready to go for a while on that.
Right.
We could pay.
Cash flow is something that we've been able to share, that timing for those larger projects. You know that the bulk of the construction costs, which is the bulk of your costs, can't start until the following summer.
So once you have the approval,
Hire the architects, incur some costs, but it's not the bulk of the costs.
it's the architects and that we could consider paying for out of reserves or.
Right. Well, now, are they, you then have to get state permission for the reimbursement, and then you would go forward with the project's my understanding.
Right, you get your application in and don't start so you know what's.
Also on the roads, we had talked about, long-range planning as far as, and I'm not trying to have this conversation tonight, but some members had expressed interest on theoretically, is it an operating cost or capital cost? And, we've had it through capital, and we got a piece in operating, and our board in past, about a year ago, expressed interest of getting a group together, but we have not done that, and I think it would be valid to do that. But I'm not sure tonight's the night to want to do that, but in interest of the member who is not here, who that's her wishes, she just wanted me to say a couple of comments, if that's all right. And she sent me an email. So Barb apologized. She can't make tonight's meeting. She had a prior commitment. and that we request that if we use whatever portion of reserves you deem appropriate to reduce capital specifically for the roads, well, I've been told that approximately $600,000 per year is one-time improvement. The remaining amount is in the $5 million capital needs for roads, 2.5 twice, is purely maintenance. Well, I know that we have bonded it in the past, this is last, I object to long-term borrowing for maintenance, therefore I request that you seriously consider using whatever reserves available to fund at least the maintenance portion of the roads. Also, she throws support to using the capital non-recurring plan with a 10-year basis to, as a way to move this expenditure back into operating budgets. And I think what you mean by that is when we had school buses, we used to bond school buses from the Board of Ed, gosh, it was many years ago, about 15, 18 years ago. We used to bond, like, buy about 20 buses at once, so we said we'll go through capital non-recurring, and then over a 5-year period, it got into their budget. So if we ever said, gee, on roads, a piece of that should be operating, not bonding, capital non-recurring would be a good fund, the way to put it into somebody's budget so you don't get budget shock. So what it means is you spend the amount of money you need to spend, and then you feather it in over a 10-year period, so eventually it goes into their budget. I don't think it's fair to ask somebody to absorb a big number in their budget if you choose to do that. But that's not for tonight's discussion. It's just, I think, something we should think about and entertain, go about the theory of what is operating, what is capital, where should it be budgeting, because right now a piece is in operating and then a piece is in capital. So unless anyone wants to go down that road, I don't propose that, but it's just something to think about. And I think it's fair that what part of long-range planning, we have this discussion too on how we budget for roads, and it's fair to the Board of Selectmen and where it should be. And we can study other towns and how they do it. And
Can we put that on the agenda for one of our first meetings after we move through this year's budget process to start those discussions?
Have we appointed the people who are going, I thought we did, to be on that subcommittee to look at this issue? Because
I don't think we did.
Maybe the first step is to have them
I think,
spend some time with Joe working on it and bring back a proposal to the board.
I think we have to work with the Board of Selectmen, to be fair. You can't just do it in a vacuum.
Yeah.
I mean, because it impacts the Board of Selectmen. So I think but I think after we get through the budget season, we should appoint 2 members and say, here's what we want to see, come back with something, give them a charge, a purpose, and get 2 members or a member, and then work with the finance people, the Tom Roy, who's head of Public Works, and a Board of Selectmen person, just to work out a reasonable plan.
I think the other point too, though, is that we shouldn't be doing it in a vacuum. I think we ought to look at it relative to kind of competing priorities and kind of the time value of money. If you think about 1.75 and probably even lower, you said last week, and you think about tax burden on current taxpayers, I mean, they're clearly, when you start talking about projects that have 15, 16, 17 years longevity, I don't think it's fair to tax current taxpayers that amount, particularly the borrowing rate that low. The Apple Walker purchase is a perfect case in point where that's going to be open space enjoyed for generations to come. And so that's something that is a natural, I think, for bonding over a longer period of time. If we're going to be using reserves, I think we ought to be factoring in, excuse me.
We're having a dialogue up here.
I think we need to
Commenting on the poor arrangements that have been made for the citizens.
Public audience.
To put a last-minute sign on the door, we're meeting upstairs, and if you're in a wheelchair, you can't attend this meeting.
Sorry for the
elevator's not
inconvenience.
working?
Thank you for allowing me to make a comment.
The elevator should be working.
Jeff, go on with your
Elevator there.
But I just say, we talked about, for example, funding our pension obligations and the return on money that's far greater there. So I think it has more to do with just that philosophical discussion. And I think, maybe a group that gets together could look at all those factors and maybe come up with some definitions of what the people view to be capital versus maintenance. But when you have something that has to be done every 16 years, I guess I'm having a hard time viewing that as maintenance.
We have to look at the history of part of what happened here. it must be 10 years ago when, I think it was Tom Roy's successor left Simsbury. We went through a
Predecessor.
predecessor, yeah. We went through about a 2 or 3 year period where we got way behind on the road work. And when we resolved that, we ended up bonding a fair amount of work to get caught up. And now that we're getting sort of to the point where we're caught up, I think we're hopefully moving to the point where, what we're doing on a regular basis is basically maintenance. Granted, some of this work lasts for 17 plus years and so forth, but we know that we're going to have a chunk of this, and I think the number we heard at our last meeting was it's a, once we get sort of caught up, it's $1.2 million on a regular basis that needs to be in the budget in one place or another, whether it's in bonding, whether it's in the operating budget, or in another version of CNR. Really doesn't make much difference, because at some point we're going to end up doing $1.2 million worth of work on a regular basis to keep our roads up, and so I think all Peter is really suggesting is that we figure out a way to make that happen, and whether it's a subcommittee or whatever, that's fine. We can do that. I think it's a good project for us to work on in the summer.
Yep.
So.
When Tom broke it out, though, he said that the majority of the expense, the total amount, was for the more intensive work. There is the yearly maintenance, and I don't have a problem with the yearly maintenance of roads and the patchwork and what have you. I guess I'm thinking about longer term redos. It's no different than we needed a new roof on. Was it Latimer Lane or Henry James? And again, there's maintenance that needs to occur on that roof over that time period that should be in the operating budget. But the cost of the new roof is significant. And again, I think it's not fair to current taxpayers philosophically to be taxing them for something that has a lifespan of 16 to 18 years.
Now, another thing we can consider with capital, is obviously paying out a reserve. So I asked Joe to give us, we have reserves of a certain number, and how are we doing this year? Are we in jeopardy of adding to reserves, or?
No, it'll definitely be positive this year, yeah. Your collection's gonna be right around 99.4, 99.5. You're already showing signs of favorability. Obviously, there's some expenses you guys were notified about that you need to do some transfers on. But I don't see you guys having a deficit this year. I think it'll be a pretty sizable surplus.
We're currently around 12%, right?
Correct.
Now, did you call bond counsel, to say if we decided to take a piece and use out of reserves instead of bonding, would that impact our bond rating? When would it cause a red flag for the rating agencies?
Fortunately, people were relatively non-committal. I had one side of the fence saying, yes, absolutely, you can't do that. The other side saying it was a decent idea. But my take on the conversations was, based on where you guys are at 12%, it looks like your floor is about 10%. I would highly recommend that you do not go below that. Also, it depends on the intent. So what are you using this money for? If you're using it for a capital expenditure, which is what you're proposing, it's not looked at poorly by the rating agencies. I think as long as you keep it relative, keep your fund balance above 10%, you guys won't have an impact from the rating agencies.
Particularly if we let them know that we're doing it to avoid additional bonding.
Correct. But there is something that's going to have to follow this. I'm probably going to be meeting with rating agencies in December. I'd like to have the formalized fund policy,
Reserve policy?
Reserve policy established and agreed upon with you guys and the Board of Selectmen, just because I'm going to need something to lean back on. Because as you guys are taking appropriation from fund balance, I just need to be able to show them that there's something in place that says, well, if you fall below a certain threshold, what is the behavior we're going to exhibit? We also need to kind
Our
of
undocumented fund balance is 10 to 12%, and we're hitting
Correct.
12. And what we've historically done is spent money on capital, out of reserves, put money into pension. And I think OPEB,
OPEB.
we've transferred money into, or transferred it over to capital non-recurring to increase that. So we've used it in a way we're probably going to agree when we do a formal policy in those capacities, and as long as we stay consistent with that. But I think they want documentation,
Correct.
just the,
Correct.
people like documentation these days. Gone are the...
Especially rating agencies.
Yes, so I think that's prudent
And
to do.
accountants.
And accountants.
But Joe, would you agree that if we're talking about 2 percentage points here from 12 down to 10, potentially we've got maybe $1.8 million to work with here? That's the right way.
I'd be more comfortable with $1 million, but yeah.
I understand,
Yes,
but
the
that-
math
but that's-
works out to $1.8 million, yes.
Okay.
I mean, another thing sometimes we like to keep in mind, Nick, is what happens technically when you accrue this, it goes off the year you're in. So meaning, even though in our mind, we're taking out of reserves for the 15 budget, on the financial statement and legally, it's reserved as of 6/30/14. So last year we did 400,000 like this. If you look at the financial statement, 400,000 came out of reserves. and
it's
was
gonna be a-
pushed
it's gonna be a
to
footnote.
designated.
It's gonna be a
Yeah, it'll be a footnote. So it lowers your reserves in the 6/30/14. So if we took $1 million out, we would be taking $1 million out of reserves in the 6/30/14. So that's technically how it works. Now, just looking at 14, we're probably going to be over in revenue because of the grand list. And you're going to be over, I believe, because we've had the land sale, so that's going to pick up revenue too. The Farrell's Farm, so that will show some money there. And then, we'll have to do some transfers for some of the Simsbury Farms and in the operating budget because of that contract issue and the agreed upon procedures that we agreed to do. So, and then depending on how Simsbury Farms comes out this year we're in, we're going to probably have to spend $500,000 or $600,000 out of that. So, in my mind, I have about $800,000-900,000, because if we did about $900,000 here, I don't think we'd look bad to anyone. I think we'd still look good. We wouldn't have. We've probably kept reserves okay. It looks like we're using reserves, but we probably, when the smoke clears, we haven't really used much of reserves. Still have financial flexibility. So, and we're kind of following the policy we have and the policy we're probably going to adopt. So, and if we can save costs, I know you might not want to reduce the projects by the cost. We can talk about that, but just anytime you can save money, that's usually a good thing. Taxpayers' money. So we might want to use the reserves to save money if we are so inclined to pass these projects. And
I
would
guess the only question I have is does it save us more money to put it into pensions or more money to put it into funding capital? Whichever
Well, in
is the better.
theory, my best guess asking the actuary is you eventually get it, but boy, it takes a long time to see it, the benefit,
I mean, in the pension plan.
On the
in a
pension
pension
side.
plan.
Okay.
Because by the time she's dealing 2 years in arrears to calculate her number,
right.
we might see it 3 years from now. So you do get a benefit there. So that's why you might not want to just dump
All of it.
2% of your reserves here. You might want to say, well, gee, let's go put 500,000 over there.
Okay.
So, long-range planning. So, what I recommend is we just keep that in mind. I mean, I kind of took the small projects and put my little check mark by them and said, if we're going to approve these would be the ones that I would probably recommend that we put through reserves. The large projects, you go to bonding.
Were you looking at the time period, kind of the lifespan of any of these? When I was thinking, for example, the regrading of the athletic fields, if I recall, was to extend the lifespan of the fields for an additional
10 years.
4 or 5 years, roughly, or was it as high as 7?
3 to 4 years more.
3 to 4 years more. So, I mean, that's
That's not the big expenditure. The 250 is just more of a maintenance item, I recall, for the
Right.
track.
It's the tractor servicing and then
Yeah.
some of the turf decompaction, the two things combined for 250. But the larger share is the track resurfacing, which avoids maintenance. If you let it go further, then it's a more expensive fix.
keeps it safe so that's like a, so
Hear me
that's 3
out.
4 years.
Let me just kind of go through the list. I mean, as far as the town projects, you've got the Ethel Walker land bond. We should probably bond that.
I agree.
Even though it's only, if we approve that, you should bond that. The multi-use trail connection, we should probably pay for it out of reserves, 212. The golf course improvements, pay for them out of reserves, if we so choose that. Bridge improvements, I know it leads to other, but the 115 probably out of reserves. The highway pavement management, I would bond, even though if we got into a philosophical discussion, I would like to do it another way, but in ease of tonight, I think bonding would make sense on that number there. The technology infrastructure, probably bond, it's a sizable number, and we've bonded that in the past. I don't think that's a problem. The alternative energy efficiency, I don't mind paying out of reserves, the 103. Now, the water pollution control projects are all being paid out of their own operating fund. Correct? So we're not dealing with those from the town aspect, so we don't have to, we just approve those and the language will state where they're getting paid from, and it's out of their own fund. On the Board of Ed side, we have infrastructure, district infrastructure. Traditionally, we've bonded that, but this is a smaller amount, so we can either bond or out of reserves. Might be out of reserves, seeing it's a smaller number. The office, I would bond that.
That's the 250?
The 775. The 280, I'm sorry, the hallway improvements, we should probably talk about that. I don't know if you got that letter I passed around? So we'll just go through this, then we'll chat about that if we could. And so that one, I'm not sure which way to go. It's probably part of that renovation if it gets done. The field maintenance, the 250, I view that as paying out of reserves. And the office project would be bonded. That's how I would view that.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When, for the projects that you've got delineated as bonding, would they all be bonded in the same year,
We get the approval for them,
this year?
yeah,
But when do we want to bond? Would some of them be 15 versus 16?
part of it is, as Burke said, depends on the cash flow needs and when they can get approval from the state for, doing the project.
Right.
If they do get approval for it. So, I mean, the answer to the question is some of them will be over the next 2 or 3 years.
We already have like about 3.7 of approvals out there that they're not spending all that money, but that happened a couple years ago.
But that would go out for this January bond?
I don't anticipate him bonding the whole thing in January.
No. And you guys will know well in advance. We'll probably be talking about how much we're bonding 4 months before, but you're still 8-9 months out.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get a sense of how the money is spaced out.
Well, here's what happens. Our board gives the authorization. The treasurer decides when to bond. Hopefully, he follows our recommendation, but he can do what he wants. I mean, legally, we can't, we don't, we just give the authorized language, the voters approve it per the charter, and then your treasurer, finance director, treasurer does the bonding to fit it in and hopefully follow the financial policies that we have. That's what we're trying to do, and make sure that that happens. So that's why, but they have flexibility, and, maybe if interest rates are, the deal of the century, and all of a sudden they spike down a point because who knows what, he might make a decision, and make it happen. I don't know. I don't think we can tie his hands to, but I mean, I don't want him to violate our policy either.
Right.
Because we manage by that policy. So if it looks like we're going to violate the policy, I would recommend we don't approve it.
When you add up how much you proposed to be taken out of reserves, what's the?
The 4 projects under the town are 555, and the 2 projects in the Board of Education will be another 400, so it's 955.
Okay.
So,
What do you know?
Yeah.
1%, how perfect.
yeah, I could still use my calculator too. That's pretty good. That's how it works. But it, so that might, and then some of those projects might come in less because we can get some savings.
5,560.
Of savings. So we could actually approve less.
20,000, you said?
25,560.
25?
So by paying out of reserves, you'd save about 25,000.
I don't think you want to go through an approval
Yeah.
process for less than. You might need it, you don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can approve the full amount, and then if he uses less, and then they'll just turn it back. I mean, I don't think next thing, we don't have to split the hair, so to speak, to get it that minute. We need them room to operate, and, but with the intent that we're looking for some savings, some turn back on those, not to spend every dime. Because the problem with the project is you put the scope in here, and if there's what's called scope creep, definitional change. I know we've had some problem, we didn't write the right definition, and we had on those towers, I remember the safety tower, once we had a little issue there, we didn't get the language right or something. So we have to allow some flexibility, so they write the language right, so they can spend what they gotta spend on a project. Because otherwise, then they have to come back to us, because bond counsel feels uncomfortable. It causes some problems. So maybe we ought to talk about some of the projects. The people want to go project by project. Do they have any, they say, gee, I don't understand why we're doing this. How do you want to approach this on these projects?
Just
Anyone?
let this go in order
The
of
one
what's
that
on
we
the,
received correspondence on.
just go in order of these,
Well, those are,
the ones we have to,
yeah, well, those are operating
It's
first.
operating.
We're in,
oh, sorry.
Let's just
Yeah,
talk
no, I
about the
meant-
capital.
I held up the wrong piece
Why
of
don't we just-
paper.
so-
These ones.
So Jeff, you brought up the one you received the correspondence on, okay? That's the
280,000.
280, that's the Henry James interior hallway improvements, first floor,
Do the hard one first.
Phase 1B, which I assume includes lockers.
So, at the last meeting, after almost everyone left, attending the meeting, I think, Burke, you addressed the issue relative to a seventh grader's very eloquent and well-stated comments, which was that she thought the lockers were perfectly fine and didn't need new lockers. And since then, you've probably seen the correspondence of the many students who signed a petition stating that the lockers aren't necessary. And my recollection was that you said the replaced lockers wouldn't have moving parts, so it would eliminate maintenance costs. So I guess the question I have was whether you're able to allocate, I think you were eliminating a custodial position next year?
There is one less custodian position district-wide in our budget. The issue was not about the cost of the maintenance, it was about the functionality and the fact that these lockers continually have needed maintenance in the operation of the doors.
Right, so is there maintenance costs associated with keeping the current lockers?
There is not a significant cost that is above and beyond. It's the time and the inconvenience of those people who need their lockers opened because the custodian has to be called with his tools to come and unjam the locker because of the mechanisms. I can give you some background on the lockers. I can give you some background on how those fit into the first phase and how that fits into the larger project. I mean, if you have other questions first, I can wait.
Well, I mean, I think you did the last meeting. We understood.
Yes.
You said it makes sense to do it while you're, ripping up carpeting and doing all the construction work to do it at the same time. It's just unusual for us to get a letter from so many students who would say, we're fine. Why do we need this? And typically, students, I would think, would come forward and say, "Oh, new lockers and wider and plenty of room." So when the constituents, the users, are saying we don't need it, just want to get your perspective.
Sure. I mean, just one quick comment on the petition that was received. There were some other comments in there, so I focused on the one statement about the lockers, and that's really all I think I'm planning to speak to. I don't think that the other comments in the context of what we're talking about here made a lot of sense to be talking about now. But the lockers that exist there have been there since the school opened in 1958. So we're talking about lockers that are roughly 55 years old. They were well made. They're good steel. The width of them is approximately 7 inches wide, and that was a more common width in prior years. And the lock mechanisms themselves, going back about 3 or 4 principles, were actually replaced. About 2/3 of them, if you walk both of the floors, have been replaced with a different mechanism. So we have problems with both the old and the new mechanisms, and I'll just hand out just some photos just so you can get a sense of what those look like currently. So there were ones where they had built-in locks. There were ones where the hardware was actually replaced to try to address that a number of years ago. So we have, through other renovation projects such as Terrafill project, we bought wider state-of-the-art lockers with these lack of moving parts that would get jammed, that would take that time away from the maintenance staff to have to deal with those issues. And we were able to fund those as part of that Terrafill renovation project. We were able to fund the 3rd floor at Simsbury High School back when that project was done. So you also see those wider 12 to 15-inch wide lockers. We have chipped away at Central School, and we're going to be doing Latimer. We've done a few at Squadron Line with these same width lockers because it makes sense today with the amount of equipment, gear, and book bags that kids have, and we have the space for it. We don't need as many locker openings. We just need a good size that will fit the book bags and the gear that kids have. So the mechanisms, by not having moving parts, you're buying something that you don't have a lot of maintenance issues with. So those are the 2 basic factors. In fact, all of the principals have really desired to have lockers replaced, I think, in all of our buildings. I've told the last several Henry James principals that to just piecemeal those lockers didn't make a lot of sense. Wait until the renovations happen. That's how we've tended to do things. So the big picture here was that we had a large renovation project, scaled that back, focused on portions of that included this main office. But since the rest of this 280,000, which is about 160,000, is to do new flooring, new ceiling, new lighting, all of the surfaces are contiguous. The main office on the first floor, and those would get an upgrade. It would only be half of the building, but that's the logical time to replace these items, bring it into the state of the art. Not saying that the existing lockers don't still hold books, but they don't have good functioning locks, and the width is not what is the state of the art today, which we've tried to do. So what I've handed out in this next group is lockers from Central School that we were able to renovate in advance of the 100th anniversary there, and you just see what you can fit in one of those. Some are the built-in styles like we have at Henry James. Some are the styles that just sit on top of the carpet. We have both of them at Henry James. This can be a 15 or it can be a 12-inch locker, and that is a good quality locker, as were the ones we originally purchased. So you've asked us to be planful, to do a good job in maintaining what we have, and we just believe it makes sense to do this project at the same time. It's unfortunate that we didn't get the opportunity, given the timing of the input from the students, which we certainly value, to explain, hey, this is what the plan is specifically. I would venture to guess that nobody has seen the level of detail who signed their name to something last Friday, and that's where we were hoping to be able to have a chance to have that dialogue. It doesn't change the fact that this is the right project, the right time to do it, and those lockers have served us well, and the new replacement locks have served us well, but they're still not functioning well.
But one
we
thing,
have some locks that function well because we have an excess of lockers, but some that are continuing to not function well.
I mean, this, for the young lady, first of all, to speak in front of us, I was very impressed
Yes.
with her coming up in
Yes.
7th grade to speak. And then she obviously has passion on the issue to go
Definitely.
get a petition. And,
Yes.
there's other things in here. You read about a little bit of where they wanted to spend money in lieu of, put it more for safety issues. So obviously, there's some concerns here. So my concern is, why is there this concern? I mean, and should we pause and let you go through the process and maybe communicate a little better before we bring this project forward? That's my thought on it. Just because obviously something's here. The person's concerned enough. She convinced a lot of people in a short time to be concerned with her.
Sure.
That's impressive. She's obviously has passion on the issue, and maybe we should listen.
And I would just add that she got all these 76 signatures, according to her, in one day. So she has a pretty strong consensus of students.
Right.
The one thing I would add, and I do admire the student, the way they stood up, the way they advocated, and I know that the principal has reached out to the student, and I know that we can, whether this goes forward or not, I think the dialogue needs to be a piece of it. I mean, I think it's a great teachable moment to talk about process, to talk about feedback. I just don't want to be short-sighted on the fact that this project in its totality of $9 million, I don't have the figures in front of me or what it was, has been on the capital improvement books for, get me close, Burke, I want to say 8 years at least, probably 10 years. We worked real hard to chunk this project out to get it within the 7%. We do feel it's a good project. It's a need. I respect your opinions as well, but
You're
we are in terms of the overall value. We're trying to renovate pieces of these buildings, do it in a cost-effective and thoughtful way. We do know there's a much bigger conversation to be had that we've talked about community-wide about number of facilities, enrollment, and everything else that I know will be engaged in. But
Matt, on the actual office, though, that work isn't going to start for another year?
The construction would be able to start in the summer of 2015 if everything went to plan.
And this project's probably going to be done when you do that. Even if it got approved now or got approved later.
That would be probably the ideal way to do it. It wasn't absolutely tied to the timing of that, but I would agree that there's merit to that.
There's no reimbursement for any of.
No, this is not reimbursable. It's a different project. But, you're not going to do the work. You're going to probably do it together to get efficiencies and get a better price.
What do you do with the old lockers?
Jeff, Linda's first.
I would echo what you're saying, Peter, and I've talked with Matt and Burke about this already. I just feel like after spending 6 years in the legislature and going to countless interminable appropriations committee hearings, never once in my tenure there did I see a constituent come forward and say, hey, the government wants to spend this money on me, and hey, I don't really need it, don't bother to spend it. People don't do that, very rarely. And so here we are faced in a situation where 76 people, and presumably their parents might agree with them, came forward and said, we don't really feel like we need this expenditure. And for me to, as you all know me as a pretty strong budget hawk, to be on in a position to vote to spend money that the people who would benefit from it are saying, no thanks, I don't need it, it's difficult for me to do that. And I understand that you guys have worked long and hard for many years to put this project on. I think what Peter's suggesting, which I agree with, is let's just take a pause and look at it again. And maybe you work with the students and maybe they end up agreeing with you that, oh, you know what, really, we didn't understand everything that you're proposing, and maybe it does make sense to do it, and you come back and there's no harm done because you can still get it done through reserves. Peter had suggested earlier we probably wouldn't bond for this anyway, but I just don't feel good about voting to do a project over the objections of the very beneficiaries of that project in a time when we're trying to be fiscally conservative. It just doesn't make sense to me to do that. Yeah.
I guess I have a little bit different take on it, sort of similar premise. Yes, admirable girl came forward to speak. It's important. It is a teachable moment. But there's a reason why 12-year-olds don't have to wait till they're 18 to vote, and it's the ability to understand the whole scope and the long-term effects of a project. And I think that there's probably a lot that what they're signing their name to that they don't understand about
Sure.
efficiencies, about long-term interests. Not to mention, you know, this project has been on since I was first on the Board of Selectmen in 2005, and I've seen it come, go, change, shrink, grow. But I think that I would still be in favor of the project going forward, while knowing that they're going to take advantage of a dialogue about process, about speaking out, about issues with them. I guess, Peter, you're saying that if we take it out of the bonding realm and pay for it with reserves, we can still commit the funds for the project while they're going through their committee?
My thought would be to defer, because obviously there's a communication issue, till they resolve the issue, and then we can deal with it through reserves at another time, but not at this time. I mean, if you approve it now, you've effectively said, we didn't listen. So I think we have to slow it down. I think we have to listen, and maybe it's a teachable moment. Maybe, you know, you have concerned people. There's something there, and maybe it's just, we have to listen to them. So let's listen, and we can still do it in the right time. I'm not saying that we're probably not going to do it, probably are, but I think you should listen. And I saw this, and I was like, it set me back. So I've been thinking about it a long time, and it obviously there's some passion here, and I think we have to communicate. I don't know, Nick, do you have any thoughts on it? Or?
I'm actually fairly indifferent with this. I would personally like to stay with this, you know, the schedule that the Board of Ed has put in front of us. It seems to me you don't do these projects and start breaking them up into little pieces, although maybe you can. But, you know, this, as Maura said, this thing has been out there as one of our desired projects. I'm talking about the whole renovation of the school for, you know, a long, long time now, and I guess my feeling is let's get it done.
I had a couple questions.
Sure.
I don't know, Burke, whether you can answer them, but what happens with the old lockers as you've replaced them in the other facilities? Are they recycled? Are they stored somewhere for use?
We have put in as a part of the contract that they both remove and install new ones. So they are taken off-site as a part of the contract, and because of the value of them, presumably they are recycled by those.
So is that's included in whatever the bid price is, the value of the lockers? I mean, that is clearly, I mean, from 1955, it's probably a pretty pure form of steel. It probably has significant value. So it's not like you have any extras that from other schools that have been removed that could be in the stage of repair to insert them here or anything like that?
Yeah, we have plenty of the circa that we're talking about, and the issue is just over time we're trying to replace the ones that are more, you know, that are more modern in terms of the width. And you know, I think it's a little bit like we think about what's happened over a period of time with our homes and our closets. Everything's gotten bigger over time. Yes, all those other
Including
things
us.
function, but this is what people are you know, using at this current time. We have the space for it. In fact, some of the standing locker banks that are there now can probably be removed because we have enough space.
So when you say we have the space for, is that because of declining enrollment?
The total number of lockers, that would be a part of it, but the total number of lockers, I believe that building may have been a high school at first. It has a lot of lockers compared with.
I mean, there are actually whole rows upstairs that are not functional at all, that are tied off. So, I mean, over time, there is going to be the need to address some of these things. I guess I'm trying to understand and understand process. You know, Peter, and I get your feedback that a concern has been vetted, and we can think about it as a teachable moment and talk about it. So, what is the process that would move that forward? Is that now a student vote? Is that how we are going to garner feedback about capital improvement projects, and what does that look like? I don't know, and I am going to have the conversation. We talked to the principal about that conversation, But I don't know then what that next step looks like. And, you know, I would seek your advisement on that, because you're saying potentially not to support something that's been approved by the Board of Ed, that's been looked at year over year, that's been part of a transparent 5-year capital improvement plan. If we're gonna go in a different direction, okay, but I need to know what that looks like in terms of how you garner.
I think what I'm asking is if we pause in the process, I'm not saying stop the process, but I think a little better communication, and obviously some of the constituents either weren't paying attention, obviously they just came to the school, the 7th graders, because they weren't around at that school a few years ago, and so maybe just a little more communication and just, as I like to call it, a little better buy-in from the constituents there as to the need. And I mean, I don't want to feel like somebody got shut out of the process and we just rolled over them.
I
And
agree.
I know we can do that, and I just don't want to feel like I'm doing that to anyone. So I got that feeling here. I don't know what the answer is, but I think the answer is a little better communication.
Can I just comment on that? First of all, I mean, in terms of what, Matt and Bert have spoken to, you do realize that, in terms of this did come from a student and 75 kids, but the Board of Education, this has been on, and I'll reiterate what Maura has said, this has been on the books for 9 years, 9 or 10 years. Every year we revisit this again, and through the Board of, all the Board of Education members for the past 9 years, this has been one of those projects, part of that Henry James that we have wanted to push forward, not backwards on the back burner. So I think in terms of the communication piece, I think you're doing a disservice by, the communication is through the academic side, with the principals, superintendents, students, each moment. But we are the Board of Education, and this is something that we consider very important because it is part of the project with Henry James.
The Board of Education consider the comments.
Let her speak.
I just want to ask a
Just let her
question.
speak, let her speak.
So I think in terms of, you have 2 communication pieces here, but we spoke with the Board of Education members today, and they feel very strongly that this needs to be part of this project to continue forward, because this is all part of the renovation piece.
We had a meeting today?
No, we just spoke individually just to someone about the letter, because some of the calls, just about, I had talked to some of them, and they just had, a couple questions about it, because this all came, so.
I guess I'm with Peter. I guess I'm feeling a little bit like the Board of Education hasn't met as a board to discuss what the students have raised. It's been on your agenda for 9 years, and in 9 years, I don't think we've seen any degradation of education. I don't think we've seen any injuries from these lockers or any adverse consequences of these lockers. I just had someone, maybe a good analog on a washing machine that's very old, who said to me, I'd recommend, because they don't make them like they used to, I'd recommend that you replace the motor in this and spend the money on that rather than buy a new washer, because it's going to break down in 3 years. And so I think they've raised some legitimate concerns, and I guess I'd like the Board of Education to consider what they have to say and to maybe report back on kind of how you're addressing those concerns. I think, again, it's, as Linda said, just very unusual. If we talked about roads, if we didn't do anything on the roads and taxpayers came forward and said, you know what, I don't want you to do anything on the roads unless there was a safety issue, it's just an unusual, very unusual thing, and it's a chunk of change, and we're not saying that it's not anything that ought to be done. We're just saying that in terms of appropriating the money, I'm not comfortable doing it right now, today.
Well, we will have our-
Lydia, what I think we're going to do is, I think everyone's we understand where we're all coming from, we understand the issue. We have to keep moving here because we got a lot of proving to do here. So as far as capital, I think we've pretty much gone through the capital items.
Could I just, one more thing, Peter, and I'll be quick, is that all right, or no?
Real quick.
Okay. If we go in that direction, I need some kind of design or outcome for what you're looking for to move it forward. Otherwise, I feel, because I'm committed to having the dialogue, and I think you all make some great points about it. What is after that? I'm just really unclear. I'm being honest. I'm unclear what is after that. Is it, are we now reporting these types of things to the Board of Finance? I'm just...
I hear what you're saying, but we have to do what we have to
works.
do, and you have to do what you have to do. So our job is to appropriate money where we feel comfortable, and where we don't appropriate money. So now let's move on to operating budgets. Are there any issues with any of the operating budgets that people saw? I mean, one, I guess the Board of Selectmen's budget, there was a change, or could be a change. The $40,000, is it $40,000? Is that the number?
Correct, yep.
Did we,
The question is the $40,000 that the Board of Ed is picking up on the security officer, the second security officer, is that
Get moved.
is that still in the $18 million
Yes, it
budget?
is. Yes.
Should we take it out, I think is our question.
Since when we approved the budget, there was an understanding that the 40,000, if the Board of Ed were to fund it, would be reduced in the Board of Selectmen budget. We've not had a conversation about whether, if the 40,000 was removed, if there was another 40,000 of projects that the board wanted to add back. So I can only tell you, there was never, I don't recall a discussion that said if 40,000 is funded, we'll go back and see if we want to add anything.
I don't think we were thinking of you adding anything.
So, yeah.
Because it's just for our bottom lines, just goes into their
It wasn't
budget, so.
intention that it would reduce the Board of Selectmen budget. That was it.
so if we change that down 40,000, we go to that, instead of 18,751,363, it'd be 18,751, I'm sorry, 711, right?
It would accurately reflect what the Board of Selectmen intended, yes.
And that would still meet your needs?
Yes.
And then we'd have to add 40 to the Board of Ed.
No.
No?
No, they had it within their bottom line. You don't make an adjustment.
Oh, okay.
It's not a shift. So they were being gracious to say they could absorb that in their existing budget, and the Board of Selectmen got the benefit of that. Now,
So that lowers what your percentage increase is, and what is that percentage
It would be
increase now?
1.98.
1.98, so you're under 2%. Yep, me too.
Peter, I have difficulty with the last item that's on here, the approval for the Simsbury Farms Fund operating budget. My feeling is that, keep in mind that the number that's here, it's $1,877,200. That's both on the revenue side and on the expense side. And quite frankly, I don't think there's snowball's chance in Hades, to be polite, of making either the revenue number or the expense number, given the current run rate that's going on in that fund. They're out of whack, I think, somewhere in the order of $250,000 right now. And what I've been looking at is basically the last 12 months. So, April 1st last year through March 31st or March 30th of this year. And if this budget, if this number can be attained, it will be, in my opinion, a miracle.
that thought has crossed my mind. Your thought? Joe, do you have any updates as far as how Simsbury Farms looks this current year we're in? I know we'd had some discussion.
I will after a conversation tomorrow, but
Yeah. I mean, I know the problem is the main revenue collection is starting now.
you guys don't have an expense problem on this side, and it kind of looks like all the projects are scalable if you were to, and I'll explain that later once I get a little bit more in depth into their operations. You guys just have a significant revenue shortfalls in this fund, and it's been happening since basically 2008. I would say for fiscal 14, I'm not cautiously optimistic, generally pessimistic.
Well, it's my understanding that there was going to be some oversight. I mean,
There was a significant discussion during the budget negotiations with Jerry's department, and there were significant changes in both the expenditure, additional revenue being brought in, increases in all of the fees, additional revenue sources.
Is that for
increase in
15 or
programs,
14?
Addition of apple barn rentals, and so there was a lot of new revenue that was proposed to meet the revenue, to offset the expenditure side. there's a monthly reporting that Jerry's doing now, and we go to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. So when we did have in-depth conversations and did review the budget, there was a comfort that there was additional revenue and a reduction in expenses. Now,
For 15, I mean, that's what
for
we're,
50.
so do we feel that
So we felt comfortable knowing that there was additional oversight, that
Yep.
there was a subcommittee, that there were additional revenues, that there were program improvements, fee increases, new sources of revenue, and reductions in expenses, that we felt comfortable at this level, knowing that we were going to continually review. Given, there was no other number that, at this point,
Yeah.
we.
That means we're gonna make an effort.
Make an adjustment.
I mean, the problem is, if it goes upside down, revenues don't meet the expenditures. People are good at spending their expenditure budget, but the revenue budget is out of your control sometimes because of weather and things like that.
And I do think that, Peter, I think that Joe has a good handle on closer monitoring requirements so that we will know earlier and report that earlier and be able to make some adjustments.
I guess from our board standpoint, I mean, what happens is if it goes into a deficit, we have to then fund it out of reserves to make the fund whole, which is part of what we're going to do next month.
Doing this year anyway.
This year anyway, so.
Yeah, but I don't think you should pass a budget where you know you're gonna have a shortfall.
Right.
We don't know on this one, we know last year we did. And this is the first time, I guess, I've heard about these more robust efforts. Is that fair, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, there's appears to be more oversight efforts and change in revenue.
Yeah, you guys have tried to do some systemic changes for the fiscal 15 budget. The special revenue funds, not every year is always going to be profitable. You're supposed to really kind of look at it over like a 5-year plan, 5-year period, and then make plans to kind of correct it. Just lack the ability to correct it or make it profitable at some point. We'll have a conversation about whether or not this goes in your operating budget, or it ceases to exist.
What used to happen is about 5 years ago, I think it was 2009, was the last year, I don't have the schedule with me, but we used to fund about 60 some odd thousand directly from selectmen's budget to it. And there was an overhead allocation that we changed. And then it basically took about $100,000 away from subsidies to the fund. And coincidentally, the revenue dropped off that year too. So we have not been making the revenue equivalent to the expenses for 4 years now. So the way we changed the budgeting contributed to some of it, and the economy or something else attributable to a piece of it. So the question is, can we reverse it? I know, we have to deal with it. Do we think there's enough oversight to go forward with the budget, or do we propose a different number?
Just a question, will there be changes in this coming fiscal year about how staff time is allocated to this budget?
That's what our subcommittee is going to
Is
look
going
at
to
and
look
make
at.
some recommendations.
Okay, so that's not necessarily going to happen.
I think the subcommittee was not comfortable acting and implementing. We had looked to
That's correct.
hopefully implement that portion and address it in this fiscal year budget, so you would have seen a difference. But the subcommittee didn't want to deal with it, or didn't
Yeah.
feel confident they had enough information and time frame, and so that's why you're not seeing that adjustment reflected. We had hoped to bring that forward, but out of respect for the subcommittee, we didn't make that adjustment.
But it might still happen in the coming months so that it would have an impact on this budget?
The problem is, if you bring it forward and you say, gee, the selectmen should absorb 50,000 more in their budget, their budget's already there. The horse is out of the barn.
Yeah, the timing is,
Yeah.
it was not, unfortunately, it was not enough time to make the adjustment for the next fiscal year budget.
I would assume it's two things are going to have to happen. Number one, it's increased revenue, and number two is the little subsidy. That's what I assume is eventually going to
Well, I
happen.
think they need to look at the expense side too.
And that's exactly right, Nick. I think, we didn't, the easiest solution is increase your subsidy, and I think the Board of Selectmen did not feel that was the solution initially. It may be, as Peter said, a portion of it, but
we really felt we needed to look at the expenditures, the management, alternatives, other revenue sources, and before we made that decision.
I'm willing to give them another chance. If everyone's focused on it and there's good focus, I think I'm hearing enough positive. People are making a good effort, so we'll see how it comes out. Hopefully the economy turns and the weather gets better too. There's a combination of things have to happen. But Nick's a good number man. He knows trends, and it's a slippery slope to make this one balance.
Just so that Mr. Toner gets the message, I will vote against this.
Okay.
I guess I have one question.
Yep.
So with the increased monitoring and the monthly reports, what types of options are out there for correcting it 4 or 5 months in if we see, say toward the end of the summer, we see things are not, we've gone through our heaviest revenue and expenditure time and things are not corrected? I'm not asking you for a commitment, I'm just saying.
It's all of the above. The problem is we look at elimination of programs, but that elimination of staff, but it affects revenue. We look at alternate revenue sources, we look at reduction of staff that don't affect programming. All of those items, some of the, there's some administrative staff. I think we've had to take a close look at, secretarial staffing. It's, things that don't affect programs. So there's not, unfortunately, there's not a lot of.
So once we pass it, we're sort of hoping that.
Hoping that the additional revenues.
But if we get reporting monthly basis, people can react, and I would assume there'll be a solution by the end of the summer to know where we are and to maybe change some of the outcome. We may not get a perfect outcome, but at least if you're moving in a positive direction, it's better than the direction we've been moving in.
No, I think you're seeing some good signs, the increasing in our ice rink revenues. We were right on. We were right on that revenue number. We've increased fees in that account, so we anticipate that number could be over the revenues that we're projecting. So, we're doing some close monitoring of the fees, the programs. I think you have to grow the revenue, and unless you get more people playing golf or, offering more programs, that's another option as well.
So I had a question.
Yeah, that's good. That's right. And Cheryl's here and reminded us that we do have Apple Barn rentals there, so that's a new initiative that, we think could be a good source of revenue, but also it's a building that could be used by the public more than it's used now. So, we have looked at a lot of options.
I just had a question on the fees going up. And again, I'm not a golfer. I don't know if it renders us non-competitive. I remember we had a presentation earlier in the year from the Parks and Rec Committee. They talked about that fine balance. If you increase the fees too much,
you're exactly right.
Membership, but
it's all delicate balance. I think we felt comfortable with the fees because it did go through Simsbury Farms and the Parks and Rec Commission, and it was reviewed by the golfers. We didn't receive any objections to it. Okay. We did some comparisons with other municipal courses, and we're still, we felt we still have room to increase. So we're not the highest, we're not the lowest. So it is a balance of revenues, expenditures, competition, but we felt comfortable that we could increase the fees, bring in additional revenues, and not be at a competitive disadvantage.
And then the other question I had was for fees for the pool. If they're increasing, is there, I think like the pay to play at the high school for athletics, I think you have a financial aid program. If somebody can't afford that, there's some funding, right, to accommodate.
We do have significant, because the town's very generous through donations and through funds that we have, we do have assistance for camp programs and pool admissions and.
Oh, good, okay.
We do work closely with the school department to offer those things and make our public aware of it.
The fees go up, like for the pool, then.
Yeah, we make sure that there's scholarships available for kids to go to camp, so that, as our camp fees increase, we do offer scholarships. It's available. We try to work together on that.
Any other discussion on this one, or any other items? Nick? happy with everything else, or?
We're talking about the back page too. Joe, in your experience at West Haven, we'll put on the referendum ballot 3 questions. The first one is the Board of Selectmen, the second one is the Board of Ed, and the third one is what I call the all of the other. Is it your experience that other towns will break item number 3 up into all the various pieces?
Great city of West Haven, we actually didn't go out to referendum. We just had it, city council approved it, so that was great. But usually it's just 2, right? Board of Ed and town.
See, my problem with the third item is it's a $12,700,000 item that includes the sewer use funds, the residential rental properties, Simsbury Farms, the non-public schools, the debt retirement, and capital non-reoccurring budgets, etc. I mean, it's all lumped together, so if a voter has a problem with one of them, they have to make a decision about voting for all of them or voting no because they have a problem with just one of them. And I think it's unfortunate that we have this situation.
What's happened in the past is, remember when we had, way back when, I think we used to do 1 budget question? When we first, yes, and it got voted down, that's when they broke it out into 3 a long time, pre my time.
So today
Way
we have
back.
a $91 million vote.
Yes, and then so nobody knew why they were against, and then what happened is, it ended up the Board of Ed was what they wanted to vote down, so it broke out, and that happened when the ECS money got pulled in the late 80s, early 90s.
We did, just to answer Nick's question, we followed what bond council gave us this year, but what Joe's already started working on for next year is which special revenue funds need to be voted on and which don't.
This is
And
very
get a
consistent, this is very
clarification.
consistent with
You're-
what we've been doing for years.
It is, but you're exactly right, and that's one of the issues that we've already identified for next year. Why are there some accounts that aren't lumped in, and why are these all lumped in? So we're trying to get
You have unlike dollars in there.
a policy for you.
Capital non-recurring, sewer fee, that's just a catch-all.
So Joe's already has that on his list to research and get back to you on that, so you can take a look at that for next year, so.
In February.
Okay. It's on your long list.
That's the one.
Nick, anything else?
And when we vote on this, we're gonna vote on the whole, everything that's on the
I
back
think
page?
the only thing we vote on are the motions up front,
Every motion.
and the capital ones, whether we give them bond language or from reserves. And I don't believe we vote on the back.
They were all voted on by Board of Finance
Last year, the chairman introduced the back page.
So we charter,
and-
okay.
And made the following resolution, and
We do
you
vote.
you do read those first 3, the first 3 questions are by the Board of Finance, not
Okay.
by the Board of Selectmen.
We don't have to read them each individually. We can say as, unless we're making changes, as stated on.
And we have to read it, I
To the
believe.
record.
We have.
They have to be read.
By
the record?
But, yeah, we've been doing all of them in detail.
All right, why don't we start voting? And let's start with the page on the draft motions for the operating budgets.
So,
And we have to read them. So, who's a good reader?
I'll start.
Joe.
I'll start with the first one here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do I have to fill my name in, or?
No, I'm doing that.
You can do that.
Do they have to pass
Yeah,
any
I make a
motions to
motion
take that
approve
40,000 out?
2014,
They-
2015 Board of
Yeah.
Selectmen
Right now.
operating budget
gotta read the right
in
number.
the amount of $18,711,363.
Second.
We can
Can I say?
make
No discussion.
motions and vote on all of them?
I'll second it if you can.
Yeah, let Jeff say. I don't think technically, I don't think
I'll
I can
second
second it. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, I make a motion to approve the 2014-15 Board of Education operating budget in the amount of $65,602,817.
You said it's almost getting to the amount.
The amount is $65,602,817.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Joan.
Aye. Any opposed?
Tell her stuff
Motion
on the
carries.
board as well.
Third one? Who wants to go?
I make a motion to approve the 2014-2015 non-public school operating budget in the amount of $533,737.
I'll second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next one.
I make a motion to approve the 2014-2015 debt retirement operating budget in the amount of $6,166,819.
Second.
Any discussion?
If we do anything else with capital, we don't need to adjust this?
I don't think we need to, Joe. I think if we do it, we just take it out of reserves. I mean, we had, a long time ago, used to budget, this number was debt retirement and capital. Back when we only
Debt
bonded
retirement.
half, we used to directly approve capital through the budget here, but that was a long time ago. I don't see us there yet. You know, when the high school bond drops off, you can probably start doing that again. All those, any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Third one,
You want to do it?
I'll make this one. I make a motion to approve the 2014-15 capital non-recurring fund budget in the amount of $1,141,934.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? Going to vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next motion.
On to me again.
Yeah, why don't you go?
I'll make a motion to approve the 2014-2015 sewer use operating budget in the amount of $2,953,372.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just that this is paid for the listening audience by the users
Yes,
of the sewer system. I'm one of them.
I'm a user too.
Not me.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? There's none. Motion carries. Next motion?
I move to approve the 2014-15 residential rental properties operating budget in the amount of $48,230.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None? All right, motion carries.
I make a motion to approve the 2014-2015 Simsbury Farms operating budget in the amount of $1,877,200.
I'll second it.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, we have 4 for, 1 against. Motion carries. On the back, somebody has to read this, and with my voice, it's probably not going to be me.
Read the whole thing?
I think we have to read the whole thing, right?
Gosh.
I can read quickly, but
Make sure you get the right number in the, Jeff,
Make sure you
who wants to do, who volunteers? All right, Lori, good.
I have a long
Good,
history of having to do this from the Board of Selectmen.
Laura's been well-trained.
good, good.
Go for it, Mark.
Pursuant to Section 808 of the Town Charter, the following motions are introduced at the special meeting of the Board of Finance on April 15, 2014. Be it resolved that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Selectmen annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015 shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $18,711,363. Be it resolved that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Education annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015 shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $65,602,817. Be it resolved that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the sewer use fund, sewer treatment plant, residential properties, rental properties, Simsbury Farm special programs, non-public schools, debt retirement, and capital non-recurring annual budgets for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015 shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $12,721,292. In accordance with Section 406 automatic referendum, and 808, duties of the Board of Finance on the budget of the charter, the recommended operating budgets will be submitted to a referendum in the following forms. Questions for referendum ballot. Number 1. Shall the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Selectmen annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015, be approved and implemented in the amount of $18,711,363? Question number 2. Shall the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Education annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015, be approved and implemented in the amount of $65,602,817? Question number 13. 3.
It just feels that
like
way.
13. Question number 3. Shall the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the sewer use fund, sewer treatment plant, residential rental properties, Simsbury Farm special programs, non-public schools, debt retirement, and capital non-recurring annual budgets for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015, be approved and implemented in the amount of $12,721,292?
I'll
I'll second that. Oh, Nick.
Second. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Do we actually have a real legal opinion saying we truly have to read all that?
Yes, we do.
The clerk, town clerk has to certify that it was read to the.
Oh, my gosh, okay.
We'll go talk to Carolyn if you,
Seems-
she keeps us on the straight and
Seems like
narrow.
ancient practice
She
to
keeps
me.
us on the straight and narrow.
Not efficient.
All right, now we have to get on to the capital projects. Now, as far as these,
To read all
Yeah.
this too?
we have to read these.
Before you get to the capital, you guys have to decide what you're doing as far as what you're financing and what you're not. So we can change the language so you guys have something to read from.
Right, because we have to change the language if we're going to do them out of reserves.
Right.
Correct.
So,
I'll
So
go
it
with
says
your-
in that the town issue bonds say that the town pay for such expenses from
Yeah, we
reserves in
have the
amount.
language.
They don't need the language. They
Well, I
need-
think if
You're gonna
we just
redraft-
go
you're gonna
through
give
one
us-
by one and just when we
I've
come
got
to
it
the
all right
ones you
here
said.
based on your comments, but just making sure that you guys are on the same page with which ones are cash and which ones, then I could print it, and you could just read right off.
could you do
Wanna
that?
take a
All right.
break, yeah.
So the first one would be bond.
Yep,
The second one
the next 3 are reserves,
would be reserves.
the next 2 are bonded.
Next to a bond,
So it'd be bond, bond.
reserves.
We have to know
Hold on.
what you're.
I got it.
I don't know if we're on the same list here, because
Yeah.
my second
Oh.
one,
Right.
We're on the
Why don't
printout.
you read what you have and then, why don't you read what you have and then advance?
Well, the 1,150,000, that's the first
I'll
one.
have that one as bonds.
Bonds, right?
The next one I have is the
Reserves.
202,000,
multi-use
212,000?
trails, 212,000.
Reserves.
Okay.
The next one is the design of the golf course, 125,000, reserves.
I have that.
The design for construction of various bridge improvements, 115,000, reserves.
Yep.
The next one would be the 2,500,000 for the paving, bond.
Yep.
The next one, 600,000 for technology, would be bond.
Yep.
The next one, 103,000 for alternative energy efficiency, reserves.
Okay.
The next one, design school infrastructure,
District on network.
design for,
150.
150 reserves.
Yep.
The next one, 775, that's bond.
Yep.
The next one, the 280,
We probably need to go through a process of turning that down if that's what
right,
we're gonna do.
but if we, right. So we'd have to, but if we
But
kind
it has
of
to be read the right way.
read the
for
right
us to
way,
vote
so
on
we'd
it.
probably do that through bonds.
Through,
What is that?
If you read that in, it's approved.
oh, so
You might
just don't
table
even
it?
read it in.
Well,
You
the
can read it in and
resolution
vote it
was
down.
approved by votes favor and opposed, so
I'll read it in but vote it
So
down?
we would need to move, not to
Space
move
for
the resolution along.
You can
Well,
also
we
put
can-
language
yeah,
on it.
we can
pending.
just move not to read it.
Kirk has a comment.
Go slow.
Sorry, I just had a question about the numbers. You would have the check boxes on the chart showing that the first project and the turf field project were the ones that you didn't want to bond. But I thought you had said earlier that if the Board of Ed were to defer the hallway project, that you could take that out of reserves again. Are you comfortable saying that that can still be considered, is my question? Because you had earlier stated you were comfortable, Peter, with $1 million. You've got about 900 something, so I didn't know whether that was the project, or do you want to switch it with the turf one?
No, we could take it out of reserves. We could use reserves. I'm on the fence.
Just from a process standpoint, I think if you are comfortable taking it out of reserves, as you indicated at Burke, then it might make sense to table that item, because
Yeah.
you're not, if you're gonna take it out of
You don't
reserves,
even
you
vote
still
on
have time to appropriate the money in the timeline. It doesn't need to be, tabling it doesn't mean you're not doing it, you're just not doing it this meeting. If you approve it, I don't
Well, if
think
we
you're
table it,
approving
it
it.
doesn't go forward. I mean, it doesn't go
No,
forward right now.
We can take it up another
But
meeting.
you can take it up, you can take it up anytime.
We can take another meeting after the Board of Education. so an
Just don't
opportunity
act
to-
on it.
Let me ask a procedural question. I mean,
Yeah.
if we take a small project out of reserves, authorize it, it's done,
Correct.
right?
You can do that at any time.
Right. So if we just table this, we just can do it at another meeting.
Correct.
Correct.
You can do it, you can put it on your next agenda.
Right.
It doesn't die, it's
Didn't get acted on.
suspended until the next meeting, or
Right.
if that's appropriate.
So instead of, so the message would be, it's tabled, more communication, if that's the way the vote goes. But
Correct.
we'd have to vote to table it.
We move
Correct.
to table?
So-
Do you want
Move
to
to do
do
that?
this one now, before we,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so we just see where, take the temperature, where we're ready to go with this? I mean, I'm not trying to push anything down anyone's opinion, but let's,
I'd move to table it pending further input from the Board of Education after evaluating the project and the students' comments.
I think we have to say specifically what we're gonna table.
Oh, I'm sorry, so tabling the $280,000 for the
Renovation.
renovation of the hallway, which includes the lockers, pending Board of Education evaluation of that project, the total expense, in light of comments from the students, who are the primary users of the lockers.
I second it.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Can we break this up?
We can table it until we get further information from,
Excuse me. Matt, or Burke, does it make any difference to you if we just pull out they want to pull out the lockers? Is it going ahead with the rest of it make any difference to you?
Doesn't solve the question that we still would have to get resolved, but it would clarify the issue, I guess.
The lockers are what, 160 of it?
120.
120.
I guess I'd like a
We have a-
holistic discussion of the Board of Education on the entire project, since they've talked about, at least Burke, about how important it is to do all this together. And so since we don't have to decide on it tonight, I guess I'd like the Board of Education, and particularly in light of Peter's comments, to consider what the constituents have had to say. They've not had an opportunity to meet as a board to discuss this in public. And we can act on a future meeting after the Board of Education reports back on what their consensus was after considering the users' comments. I'm not comfortable with the fact that there's been one-off discussions with board members. I'd prefer that there be a public meeting where the board has an opportunity to discuss the project holistically in light of the students' comments.
If we table it, I mean, a meeting, if it goes through as a table, the meeting I envision it happening is on the referendum night, we have to pass the mill rate. We can then, if things are to a point there, we can bring it up at that meeting, which is May 6th.
So is there opportunity for public comment at that meeting?
No, but there's opportunity for the Board of Education to have to meet, right? You guys are meeting between now and May 6th, right?
Then you just
Yeah, we'll
follow
take
the
a look
regular
at it.
transfer.
I guess the.
That makes sense.
But I think
More?
it needs to be
I
in
guess
selectmen
I'm feeling a little
approval.
uncomfortable.
Yes, it does.
We're getting.
Actually, you're right.
Part of this project process because we want this communication with the students, but we're also not paying attention to the process that's already gone through by the elected Board of Education members, in their deliberation process bringing this through. And I feel uncomfortable. I guess I feel like I'm micromanaging another elected board. To make me feel more comfortable, I agree with Nick about pulling out at least the locker portion of it for a discussion on referendum night. We have people speak for and against budget items all the time, and we don't table them. We have people for and against the golf all the time. And I feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
I just think it's unusual, very unusual to have, as Linda said, 6 years in legislature. And I think it would be disrespectful to the students to not have the Board of Education consider the comments of a large group of students.
The thing is, if we're gonna do a table, do you want to table the whole thing or a piece of it? I mean,
Your motion is to table the whole
I
thing.
think we should table the
whole thing.
entire thing so the Board of
So,
Education can look at it.
discussion had been, you want to call the vote?
Yep.
Okay, so the motion is
Table.
to table the $280,000 for the
So the Board of
renovations.
Education has an opportunity to reflect upon the comments, and I don't know if you got all that,
got a
and
vote?
to report back to the Board of Finance as to their conclusions after looking at the project holistically. And
All right, so there's been a second, we've had discussion, we're now going to vote on it. Is everyone ready to vote? All those, so you vote to table, so if you vote for it, you're voting to table it. If you vote against it, you're voting not to table it. Okay? Does that, everyone understand?
And if you're not voting to table it, what does that mean?
then you just vote no to the motion.
Well, if it doesn't get tabled, we're going to include it
We're gonna vote
in
for it.
this process.
Okay, so the vote is to table it. All those in favor of the table?
Aye.
Aye. 3 ayes. All those against the table? 2. So it gets tabled.
I think
you need,
No,
I think that's a.
I think you
I
need
think
4.
it's a budget number. Hold on. We'll check something. We have a procedural question,
Okay?
What's procedural question?
I think you need 4.
whether you need 3 or 4 votes.
I think the budget spikes out 4.
But it's not passing the budget.
The budget question. Same thing as a rejection.
Well, we're-
But you're going to have the same problem if you can't pass it with 4.
Yep.
So in essence,
Why do you guys have even boards anyway?
state law.
We're all about democracy here
State
in
law.
Simsbury.
Business?
Most of the time they're odds. There's a built-in tiebreaker.
As far as
Well, we
addressing
have
the
a tiebreaker
procedural
here.
question, are you looking up the charter?
Yeah, and why don't we take a 5-minute recess, if that's okay? I mean,
All
just so
right.
we can check that, and,
Well, we can go forward with the
Why
rest
don't
of
we
this.
go forward with the rest?
all right.
And then we'll get
I
back
just
to
didn't want
this.
you waiting for us.
Yeah, we'd
Okay.
just like to
We
get
need
home
to
before
do, we
midnight.
need to do this individually, I'm sure. yeah.
So let's go back to, we have
We
to
do
read
all the
each of the
ones that are
resolutions.
bonded.
Now, you're gonna have to make bond language up for the other ones, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So why don't we take a 5-minute break while they make the language up for us? Because we're gonna read off of.
Isn't the bond language
Do you
here?
agree?
So-
No, the reserves,
They have to,
yeah, Sean, do you have the revised language
hang
for
on, hang on.
reserves?
With the capital budget?
Yes, on the
Yeah.
capital, the ones we're gonna do from reserves, you're gonna change.
Well, you had made it to the hallway renovations right now.
I'm sorry.
You had finished the other,
Okay.
I'll make sure I have a whole list. The next one I have after that is 250,000 for
Turf.
the turf.
That would be
one's
reserves.
Yep, that's how it is.
Next one would be the $1,050,000
So that is bonds.
bond.
And we'll bond that.
Yep.
And then the next one is,
I have sewer, 65,000, is that? your
that
next
just
one?
stays as is.
And so, yeah, as.
Sewer use?
From sewer use fund, yep.
The next one's sewer use fund, 156, stays as is. The next is sewer use, the 260.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's it, and then you have a final resolution that you read that
Right.
says you're not to exceed 10 years unless you're making exceptions for any project, so you just insert those in. So yeah, it's done. If you would like, I'll just go print 6 copies or 5
Could you?
copies.
7.
7 copies, sorry.
Thank you.
Be right back.
Want to start off reading these? then?
You know, in
Or we
terms
ta-
of
Are we
a-
taking a break?
8-minute break till he comes back and.